Glad you're here today. Turn your Bibles to 1 Timothy 5. 1 Timothy 5. We're going to continue to talk about family over the course of the next few weeks as we lead up to this family workshop with Trey and Lee Morgan, March 10th, Friday night, March 10th, Saturday morning, March 11th. And the neat thing about this workshop is that it's not going to take your whole weekend. A lot of people are a little leery of these type of workshops, thinking, you know what, I don't want to give my whole weekend away. You won't. It's Friday night and Saturday morning. We will be done at noon. So it will be worth your while. Go to cabotchurch.com and register. You want to be there for this. 1 Timothy 5, I'll meet you there. I sat in the sleet on the cold bleachers watching boys run around a track because one of them was Dylan. That's family. I've watched many halftime dances, gone to many dance competitions, not because I'm a huge dance fan by any means, but because Faith was dancing. That's family. I fell down a hill at the Chili Pepper cross-country meet in Fayetteville, trying to get from point A to point B so I could be there to see Ashlyn as she runs by. Family. Walk through malls, watch chick flicks, because I like hanging out with Christy. Family. When we lived in Texas, I drove 45 minutes out of the way to this little podunk town called Littlefield to buy beef jerky that I don't even like, but my dad, for him, because he said that place makes the best beef jerky on the planet. And I would do that for him. That's family. Family. I don't know of another word that evokes more action and emotion from us than family. I mean, let's face it, we do a lot for our family. We do a lot for our kids. You do a lot for your grandkids. We do a lot for our spouse. We do a lot for our family. I will never forget many nights at the ballpark, but one stands out. And I was coaching third base in Missouri. And we had not been in this little town very long. And my mom and dad and my wife were sitting alongside the fence, outside, obviously, the fence, watching the game as Dylan was playing. And the umpire was a teenage boy whose daddy was the commissioner. Good kid, I guess. But he makes a call, and when he made the call, he went over to the fence and he asked his dad, and then he come back and he made the call again, and I thought, oh, boy, you can't do that. He made the right call, but anyway, between innings, I walked over and I said, Bud, you're doing a good job. But I said, hey, man, when you make a call, make that call and stand by it. And he looked me in the eye and said, I don't have to listen to you, and you can't talk to me like that. And I said, okay. And I turned and walked away, and I thought that's the end of it. Well, he went to the fence and started talking to his mom. Well, my mama was there. And I don't know if you know her very well, but she will be 70 on Friday. And you know where you stand with this woman, always. So he started talking to his mom and really running me down. What did that coach say? We need to get your dad. He needs to throw that coach out of the game. On and on and on. Well, my mom turned around and said, that coach is my son. And he was just trying to offer him some advice. And then the woman jumped and started fussing at my mom and said, well, I'm going to have my husband throw you out of the game. And she said, he's not going to throw me out of the game. Well, I didn't know the commissioner really well, but I knew my mama real well. And she didn't get thrown out of the game. But why did that happen? Because that was her son. We do a lot for our family. We will defend our family. We're gonna stand with our family. We do so much for our family. 1 Timothy 5, go there with me. And the context, I understand the context. And I'm going to read to you from Matthew 12. It's not on the PowerPoint. I understand the context of 1 Timothy 5. We're talking about widows and things like that. But there are a whole lot of things we can pull out about family, which is what I want us to do. In Matthew 12, Jesus would say, in verse 48 and following, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother, here and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." He says, those that do the will of my Father, that's my family. He said, they're my family. And then we go to our text in 1 Timothy 5 this morning, and much said, the context we're going to get to quickly is about widows and the church's responsibility to widows. And we don't hear a lot of sermons about this. Most of the time we talk about 1 Timothy 5 when we're doing a Bible class, and that's where we get. Okay? But there's a whole lot more to this. There's some underlying principles here that we need to be aware of and we need to give attention to. The first thing you're going to see in 1 Timothy 5, 1 and 2, Paul says, treat the church like family. Notice what he says. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Some translations use the word elder when he's talking about the older men. He's not talking about an elder that like we have here, 9 shepherds, 9 overseers. He's not talking about an overseer in the context there. He's talking about an older man in the congregation, in the church, and he's saying, don't be harsh with him. You treat the older men in the church like you would treat your own dad. There's respect there, there's love there, there's admiration there. Now, he's not saying don't rebuke him. If there's a correction that must take place, handle it, but handle it like you're talking to your dad. And that puts a little bit of different slant on it, doesn't it? We're going to handle it a little different, aren't we? But his point is, treat older men in the church like you would treat your dad. We learn a lot from the older men in the church. But we should. Treat them like you would treat your dad. Respect, love, admiration. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Listen when they speak. But he goes on and he says, treat the younger men as brothers. We are brothers in Christ. Here's the thing I've learned about brothers, and I don't have any siblings, but here's the thing I've learned about brothers is they don't always get along, but they always have one another's back. And I think that's the coolest thing ever. They may not always get along. They may not see eye to eye on everything. They might do everything just the same way, but they always have the other person's back. Brothers spend time together. They share with one another. They enjoy a fellowship and a relationship that no other people can comprehend unless you're brothers. And he said, I want you to treat the younger men in the congregation like that. The older men like fathers, the younger men like brothers. It was a cool thing yesterday as I was leaving the golf course. 2 younger brothers had their little boys at the golf course, and they were finishing up. But as I stopped and said hello and we talked for a minute, I pulled away and I thought, man, that's a cool thing. That's cool. Yeah, that they got their little boys out there, but that they're enjoying that together. That's a cool thing. I like that. That's what brothers do. And then he mentions the older women. Older women I want you to treat as mothers. Again, speaks of love, respect that we're to have for the older ladies. Let me break that down for you. Treating her like a mother. It says give her a hug. Stop by and visit her. Serve her. Help her with her chores. Give her time. Give her your time. In 20 years, let me tell you what I've learned about older women. And I didn't mean it the way that sounded. I meant the older women in the congregation. Seriously. That did not come out right. The older women in the congregation, let's just be honest, they're the backbone of the church. They're the backbone of the congregation. And I'm not just speaking of this congregation, every congregation I've been around. They are the backbone of the congregation. Treat them with love and respect like you would your own mother. There's a certain nurturing care that I'm not sure we totally outgrow, no matter how old we are. And the older women in the congregation can provide that. I think that's a pretty awesome thing. So he's saying, I want you to treat the church like family. The older men like dads. The younger men like brothers. The older women like mothers. Then he moves on to the younger women. And he says, I want you to treat the younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Why would he mention absolute purity? Why would that even have to be a part of this context? Because Paul wants to be crystal clear that this is a pure brother-sister relationship. You be careful, guys, how you look at the younger women because they're family. You be careful what you say to the younger women because they're family. They are your sisters in Christ. And Paul wants desperately to drive that point home. They're family. Don't look at them the wrong way. Don't you act inappropriate to them. They're your family. They're sisters. And I got to tell you, I got to be honest, I never had a sister. So I love having so many sisters in Christ. And I treat them like sisters, and I aggravate them, and I tease them, and many of them will vouch for that, but you need to understand they do that to me too. But that's the kind of relationship, that's a beautiful thing when we can have that close-knit relationship where we can kind of tease and love one another that way. Treat the church like family. Now, let's move on. Secondly, he's going to make the point, take care of your family. 1 Timothy 5:3 and following. Read this with me. He says, give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. And that phrase is going to be repeated 2 more times in this context. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need, there it is again, and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. Give the people these instructions too, Timothy, so that no one may be open to blame. Listen to verse 8. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So I want you to take care of the church, I want you to treat the church like family. And then secondly, he says, I want you to take care of your family. That's what family does. You take care of your family. I understand the context is widows, and we're going to get into the widows in just a minute. But again, there are principles and lessons even before we get there. And it's take care of your family. Family members should care. In verse 4, he would say if a widow has children or grandchildren, they need to step up to the plate and care for the widow and their family. Take care of your family. You're going to see later on, he's going to say, I don't want the church to be burdened with them if they have family members. And we're going, I don't like that terminology very much. Well, that's the terminology Paul's going to use, okay? And he's not trying to be rude. He's not trying to be crude. He's not trying to be mean. He's just laying it out there so you and I can understand. These are the widows that are to be cared for. Family, take care of your family. If you have widows in your family, take care of them. He even emphasizes this principle by saying, put your religion into practice. In verse 4, look. If a widow If a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. So put your religion into practice, as if to say, faith without works is dead. I think somebody wrote that somewhere. Show your faith, put your religion into practice by caring for your family members. Don't act all spiritual when you've got family members that are struggling and you're not caring for them. In verse 8, Paul would say, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I don't know how else you can exegete that but to say, that's pretty serious. He puts the church, Christians, in a box with unbelievers and said, well, actually outside a box, it says, you're worse than them if you don't care for your family. If you have a family member that has a need, and we're saying, okay, but what kind of care? What are we talking about specifically? Any kind of care. If you've got a family member, a widow in your family, and she needs rides, or she needs money, or she needs chores done, or she needs whatever, that's your responsibility as a Christian to take care of her. Meet those needs. We don't hear these lessons a lot, do we? That's my responsibility with my family. That's your responsibility with your family. I got to tell you, for 14 years, I watched my mom take care of my dad. And I mean took care of him. I'll go Saturday morning to Rolla to do a memorial service for a man who had a stroke in 2005. And his wife, for the past 12 years, has cared for him. I mean, everything you could think of, she's done for this man. Not begrudgingly, she wouldn't have it any other way. That's what family does. And that's his point. If there's a financial need, meet it. Take care of them. If it's a health issue and they need you helping in other areas, then do that. But family, take care of your family. Treat the church like family and take care of your family. And then he gets kind of to the heart of his point and where he's going. Thirdly, the church is to treat the widows in need like family. Now hold on before you get upset. We treat everybody like family because we are family. I want to be clear on that. But when I make the comment, when I make the statement that the church is to treat the widows in need like family, what I mean, he says 3 times in the context, the widows who are really in need. And we're going to define what that means. But my point is, those who are really in need, those widows, the church treats like family by caring for their needs, whatever those needs are. If they're financial, if they're physical, if they need rides, all the things I've mentioned, the church takes them in and cares for them if they meet a certain criteria, which we'll talk about in a minute. And maybe you're struggling with this, and I just don't like this language. I don't like the criteria. I don't like not being burdened. I don't like that terminology. This is the terminology Paul is using, okay? He's trying to line out things perfectly so that congregations can see what God's plan is for them in helping widows and serving in that way, okay? Because every congregation certainly has to meet those needs. All right, the church is to treat the widows in need like family. Look at verse 3. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. Verse 5. The widow who is really in need. Look at verse 16. If any woman is a believer and has widows in her family, she should help them and not let the church be burdened. That's what I was talking about a minute ago. With them. We kind of struggle with that. It's not a burden. We want to take care of them, absolutely. But you can't take care of all of them. The church can't. So their families have to take responsibility so the church can help those who are really in need. But he goes on so that the church can help those widows who are really in need. So 3 times he says the church's responsibility to widows are the widows who are really in need. And that means these are the widows who are alone and without family. Look in verse 5. The widow who is really in need and left all alone. She puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and ask God for help. She's a Christian, but she has no family. We're going to see she's faithful to the church, but she has no family. And Paul's going to say, that's the widow who is really in need with no family, faithful to the Lord. We need to care for her. Well, what do you mean care for her? Encourage her? Yes. Support her? Oh, yeah. Give her rides? Absolutely, if that's what she needs. Mow her yard? Absolutely. I mean, when I say care for her, and I think in the context what he means is you meet whatever needs she has. She doesn't have family that can run by and mow her grass. She doesn't have family that can make sure the rent's paid when she's a little short that month, or whatever the case is. So the church takes on that responsibility of those widows who are really in need. That's the context. That's the message. That's the point he's trying to drive home. And he's clear that the widows who are really in need are those who are all alone and left without family. Look at verses 9 and 10. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she is over 60, has been faithful. We'll finish that in a minute. This list. What's this list? This list represents the names of the individuals that the church should take responsibility for. Whatever that means. And when I say that, that's what I mean. Whatever that means. For this widow, it may just mean taking care of her yard and all outside handiwork. For this widow, it may mean we got to make sure she's got groceries because she's running short every month. But this list, and we're going to look at the criteria of the widows that meet that need that can go on that list. Number one, we've already said she's got to be all alone. She doesn't have family. If she has family, her family needs to take care of that responsibility, right? What family does. We talked about that. Family does a lot for family. But if she doesn't have family, and if she's a Christian, she's faithful to the Lord. Okay? And then he continues on. Let's look at the criteria here. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she is over 60, has been faithful to her husband. Now I got to tell you, the old translation, the American Standard says, has had but one husband. Okay, and I know that can certainly cause some room for discussion, but I got to tell you that old American Standard's close to the Greek. Okay, very close. So she's over 60, she's been faithful to her husband or had but one husband and is well known for her good deeds such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the saints, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. So this is the lady, over 60, faithful to her husband, known for good deeds, serving others, raising children, hospitable, washing the feet of the saints. And how do we wash the feet of the saints today? You say, well, we don't. That's nasty. Well, we wash their feet by serving them, don't we? But I got to tell you, in the context, washing the feet of the saints probably meant washing the feet of the saints. Because that, in the context of their culture, that's what they did. They'd fill a little basin or bowl full of water and they'd wash feet when people came to visit. Some of them had walked barefooted. Some of them had had some kind of shoe or sandal. But their feet were dusty and maybe muddy, covered in dirt. They washed their feet. So I think that's literal there. Certainly we would apply it to our culture as serving today. So she's done all of these things for other people. She's known as being selfless, for helping those in trouble, being devoted to good deeds. This lady's been a faithful Christian wife, mother, and a servant to many. And she's by herself. She has no family. And Paul's saying, you need to put her on the list. You need to make sure her needs are met. Whatever those needs are. Okay? In James 1, I want to look at this. Verse 27. It doesn't get any more practical than the book of James, okay? And notice what he says in verse 27, James 1. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this. This should get your attention. That one line ought to stop you in your tracks and make you think, I want to know what pleases God. I want to know the kind of religion that pleases Him. It's to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And yes, to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. But to look after orphans and widows. And I know that in times there have been some controversies around, do you take money and send to an orphan's home? Or do you, there's been controversy. Had somebody call me a long time ago and said, does your church support orphans' homes and all those kinds of things? And I didn't know all the ins and the outs about the budget at the time, but I said, I know we can and we will. And he said, okay, that's all I need to know. As if I'm not going to worship with you if you support. Well, James 1 says do that. Take care of them. Let's don't make an issue where there's not an issue. We're so good at that. All right, now, he also said, widows, take care of widows. So that's something we got to do. And Paul clearly, I shared with you the criteria. This is what he wants. She's Christian. She meets the age criteria. She's by herself. She has no family. And she's been a servant, yes, to her husband, and so many. But then in verse 11 through 15, 1 Timothy 5, he mentions the widows that he doesn't want on the list. Let's go through this pretty quickly. As for younger widows, do not put them on such a list. He's talking about the young ladies that are widows. For when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Thus they bring judgment on themselves because they've broken their first pledge. Their first pledge is to Christ. Just want you to be mindful of that. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. And not only do they become idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things they ought not to. So I counsel younger widows to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Some have in fact already turned away to follow Satan. Treat the church like family. Take care of your family. And here are the widows I want you to treat like family. Treat them all like family. Don't misunderstand me. But when I say that, I mean these are the widows I want you to care for. They're alone. They've been faithful to their husband. They're 60. They're faithful to Christ. They meet all this criteria. But then he includes another list that says, these are the ladies I don't want you to put on the list. And he's not being mean. We love them. They're family. But he says the younger ones, the younger women, they're a little more prone, their desires, they're probably going to remarry, but they're a little more prone to being idle gossips and busybodies, going from house to house, too much time on their hands, leading them to stir up some issues and problems and things. So Paul says, my advice is this, to the younger widows, I would say marry. Marry and have a family and care for and manage that family. That keeps them busy, that keeps them out of trouble, that hopefully keeps them faithful to God, which is the ultimate goal there. And he mentions some have even turned away to follow Satan. They followed those sensual desires, and they've gone after the pleasures of the world, following Satan. So he's not saying anything bad about the younger widows. He's just saying there's a difference in the younger ones and the older ones. And here's the difference. And this is where the church has got to stand. This is where we got to be. And here's our responsibility. In verse 16, he would say, we read it a minute ago, if any woman who is a believer has widows in her family, she should help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church can help those widows who are really in need. He emphasizes again that the widow with family shouldn't be on the list. The younger widow shouldn't be on the list. But the church does have a responsibility to meet the needs of the widows who are alone. Family has a responsibility to meet the needs of the widows in their family, or their other family members for that matter, he would say. Family's important, and family does so much for family. And I hope we see from this morning, it's not just all about the widows. There's so many lessons in there about family. Today, if we can help you, if we can encourage you, whatever your need might be, if it be spiritual, if it be physical, we will have a shepherd here to greet you. If you would come as together we stand and as we sing.